Hi, it's Richard Little from Your Land Partner. I'm going to talk to you today. We're in the middle of a number of video sessions on the full development appraisal and the 9 areas that we look at in the actual FDA. And we're on number 34 out of 100 live sessions that we're actually doing, taking you all the way through a development project from finding it in the first place to exiting it at the end, with all detail all the way through. So today I'm going to talk to you relatively briefly about planning and how we look at planning in the full development appraisal. So previously we've looked at scheme demand, which is led from the demand, and also a balancing act with what the local planners may deem acceptable. So when we're looking at planning in respect of the FDA, what we're actually looking at now is what planning strategy are we, or strategies are we actually going to use? How is that going to impact on the time frame? How is that going to impact on the numbers? And this all feeds into the deal structure, the details of the deal, if you like, timeline particularly. So we have a number of videos that we're going to go into details on plan itself. So what I'm going to sort of mention now is planning strategy, and we will do at least one video on that, because that for me is fascinating and key to being a lead developer, but doesn't get spoken about very much, to be fair. But we're going to put that to one side at the moment, and look at specifically what we look at in terms of the FDA. So we will look at the strategy, and just as a sort of a taster, if you like, we will use different planning applications at different times. We might have 2 applications, parallel applications, so submitted for different schemes at the same time. We did that year before last, where we actually gave 4 different planning applications, 4 different schemes through applications to a local authority, which was pretty much every possibility you could do with the site. And we did that. Obviously, there's a cost to this, but sometimes if you understand how a local authority planning department works and functions, not just the department, but actually the wider context of planning in terms of planning committees, etc., how that works, how PINS works, which effectively is the appeal system. We always plan to go, or strategize, I should say, rather than plan. We all strategize to go to appeal. Always. Everything we do in planning is about leading up to appeal. We don't want to go to appeal, but that's the way we do. Again, more about that on another occasion in much more detail. So we will be looking at the time frame. So what is it about a particular project that we're doing an appraisal on? What is it that's going to impact perhaps on the planning time? Is it a sensitive site? Is it, but by now we may well have actually done some sort of planning assessment. We might have even had a pre-application in some cases, even before we actually structured the deal. It depends how much money's at stake generally. So let's assume we haven't had a pre-app. We've had no official input into our schemes from planners. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get unofficial. It is a lot rarer now, but when you've been around a bit and you've got some relationships with certain planners in certain areas, you can get a bit of a steer. But to be fair, you really should know what they're going to say before they say it. And that's part of your role as a lead developer, and very much part of your relationship if you're not as fortunate as us and have a lot of planning experience when you're working with planning consultants generally. So coming back to what we are going to put in the full development appraisal, the key thing here is time. How long is it going to take us to get? Should we get it? There's always a doubt. Should we get what it is we are looking for? So in that respect, we need to make sure that in the deal structure and in the numbers, part of the full development appraisal is about the numbers. Obviously, we have to do the numbers. What's the time lag? What's going to happen? So if we've got a site that's already got planning on it, for instance, but we want to change the planning, we want to enhance the planning generally, so increase the value of the site in some form or other, then we will know from the planning history of that particular site, which we would have picked up in previous sessions on planning and assessment. Before we get to the full development appraisal, we'll pretty much know where that's going to go. Now, there is always the chance that something won't quite go as you plan it, in terms of third party, perhaps intervention, shall we say, particularly from councillors, planning officers, etc. There's all sorts of things that can go on. But at the point of the full development appraisal, what we are actually really considering, is okay, what risks is our planning strategy likely to bring to this particular project that we're appraising? What is the timeline of this? So when we are then taking that forward into perhaps negotiations and then further into heads of terms and getting those agreements exchanged and completed where appropriate, is okay, what is that time? What is the time likely to be? So, people will tell you a planning application, a major scheme, etc. Could be 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, etc. And it does vary depending on where you are. So you might have had experience of one time frame, but it's not always the same. Even in the same area, it's not always the same. So what is the implication, and what's the chances of us actually getting planning at the first effort? Most of you will know, if you've listened to us before, we always use the pre-app process, always. Now, if a pre-app's been put in before on a scheme that we're then brought to, we will still go back to the pre-app and have a supplementary meeting or something like that. So we'll always use it. There is no reason not to use it. And the prime reason we do that is because, as I've mentioned previously, is we always plan to go to appeal. We always expect to go to appeal, and then we're not disappointed. Now, do we go to appeal very often? No, not very often. We had one last year. No, let me get that back. Yeah, one last year, possibly one the year before. Yeah, I think that's right. So not that often, but we still plan to do that. And often when we're dealing with our planning consultant team, as I say, mostly in-house, but we also bring planning consultants on board. One of the appeals that we had 3 different planning consultants working on that. At different points, and they're all aware of other people and what they're doing, etc. And we'll talk about that in a future video. So sometimes one planning consultant isn't enough. You actually need, because like everything else, like doctors, they've all got their expertise. They might be able to give you a good idea whether you've broken your bone or not, but you might want to know a little bit more detail about that. So, and planning consultants are no different. So a planning consultant isn't going to have all the answers to every question that you come up with, every project you put forward with. We don't, as got a wide experience planning team, if you like, we don't have all the answers. We've seen most of it before, and we know what questions to ask, moving forward, but they don't always have the right answers. But coming back to the FDA, what are we looking at? As I say, we're looking at mostly how the time frame will work. So then when we're taking that forward to heads of terms and agreements, what we want to do is, if we were using a promotion or an option or a conditional purchase, something like that, we want to put the right time frame in, and we also want to put the right clauses in for extensions. And we will always have something in there that's fairly loose anyway, and most lawyers, even on the other side, they will accept that, generally, planning is not an exact science. So yeah, we're going to give you a little bit of leeway. So be very, very careful that you don't underestimate how long planning is going to take you, because this is going to be fundamental. If a project stacks up financially, that's great, but actually, have you actually allowed enough time to get planning? So once you start looking at funding and that, getting investors on board, etc., they want to make sure that your time frames are realistic. So in the FDA, we'll always be allowing an amount of time for the planning, the pre-planning, if you like, and then the planning process, and potentially an appeal. But most of our deals don't kick in until planning's in place, so we're not actually really, committing other than our planning costs, which can be considerable, until such time as we've got that consent. So generally the clock doesn't always start ticking at that point. It sometimes pauses. So, as I say, at this point in the FDA, it's really, really key to understand what your planning options are, if you like. As I said, started to say before, you might have parallel applications, so you've got 2 or 3 running at the same time. Most planning departments don't like that because they feel that you're pressuring them and not listening to them. But equally, they'll accept it if you've got a valid reason, particularly if you've entered dialogue at the pre-app stage. And we try and build a little bit of credibility at the pre-app stage. Again, we'll be doing 1 or 2 videos on that because it's fundamental in my view. What do I know? But in my view, it's fundamental, and it's too easily overlooked. And people that don't have the experience, the depth of experience we have, it's very easy to get steered by your consultants who may well be fantastic, but they don't think like a developer, and it's different. So actually they will think in pure planning terms, and that's not what a developer is about. Understanding planning, absolutely, need to understand planning. The more you understand planning, the more solid a developer you will be to deliver projects and good investment opportunities for people as well. So we're here just to talk about the FDA. As ever, I'll probably expand a little bit more, but it's being clear in that FDA what is the timeline and what's the cost. So, you can look at the planning application and the planning fee from the consultant, but how many people would consider to put 2 applications in, either parallel or one after the other, which sometimes is also quite good, particularly if you've got a difficult planning committee, shall we say. So sometimes you have to put them under pressure, and people will realise that actually that's what's happening. They won't like it, but that's not here. You're not here to win friends at this particular point. When it's appropriate, that's fine, but generally planning's not about that. You're not going to get pally-pally with the planning officers. You can be pleasant and you can pass in. You can get a bit of respect for each other, etc. We've got a few that we know which are pretty good. We know a lot more that we'd say are pretty average, and we know some that are diabolical, but you still have to deal with them sometimes. So we obviously have a different approach on that. But understanding, the costs of 2, 3 applications and the costs of going to an appeal, you need to structure that. You need to put that in your full development appraisal. And when not just the numbers in terms of the costs, but the time frames. So it's very, very underestimated, should we say, the value of spending more money on planning and not less. Now, I know there'll be a lot of planning consultants and a lot of architects, not a lot, some architects and some planning consultants that get this, and they're the people you want to work with. Not because they're trying to get more money out of you, but they understand the system. And often Bryn talks about money mindset and stuff like that, and sometimes you have to risk more to cut down. You have to invest more money, to actually cut down on the risk. And we do that a lot. We spend a massive amount of money on surveys and even for pre-apps, etc., that we don't need to do, but if you do them, it adds an extra 1%, 2%, whatever, in terms of chances, if you like, and of actually getting the right response. So underestimate or underinvesting in planning is one of the areas we say that many developers they fall, they lose projects over it because they don't invest enough money. Now, I'm not saying you should go to a planning consultant that charges you £500 an hour and that's going to be brilliant. That might be suitable, depends on the size of the scheme, but you're probably better off working with somebody that's sort of not as expensive as that, because in our experience, the more you pay, this is not an example of you get what you pay for. In fact, I'll say right now that doesn't work across most consultancies, most types of consultancies. The more you pay is not in a direct relationship to the value that you get. Now, sometimes, from a planning perspective, our planning consultant will arrange for us to get advice from a barrister. Yeah, and we will pay for advice. So we had a letter drafted, £8,000, something like that, probably took them 2-3 hours, 4 hours, maybe something like that. But that's the sort of rates we'll pay. But that was key. That was really, so our planning consultant said, I think we need to get an opinion, so a legal opinion, to actually, increase our chances. Now you need to put that in the numbers in your appraisal, in your full development appraisal, because if you don't, where's it going to come from? So you need to understand, are we likely going to have to do that? So for most people, this part, the full development appraisal, is where you're really starting talking to your planning consultants. Some of those guys will be architects, despite what we sometimes say. There's probably more architects with decent planning experience than we've probably met, to be fair. I've met a lot more since I've been saying there isn't many than I did previously. So actually we've got quite a few now that they're pretty decent, but they have their limits. They have the limits on scheme size, scheme type, and how tough it is. So just to finish up, in the full development appraisal, the key thing from a planning perspective is knowing what the strategy is, how long it's going to take to deliver, what the risks are in terms of time, what the investment is in terms of cash that you're going to have to put in order to give you the best possible chance of gaining that planning consent, whether that's initial planning consent, whether it's outline or full, or whether it's enhanced planning based on something that's already in existence or been in existence. So this is what we're looking at this particular point. As I say, you probably get by now, I talk about planning for a long time, and we will, I promise you, be doing quite a few videos on that from a developer's point of view, not from a planning consultant's point of view or a planner's point of view, from a developer's point of view. And it isn't always about that, us and them, but I will tell you right now, it often is. Okay, so this has been Richard Little for your land partner, talking about full development appraisal planning. So see you again another day.